All right, so now we are live. So for everybody who was confused, I canceled the meeting, I re-canceled it, I added something else. So this is the 11 o'clock. We're doing quick triage today because the Xamarin guys couldn't make it. So,
hi Mark.
Any preferences on... Well, I should say the Xamarin Essentials guys couldn't make it. Yeah, so any preferences for order? Like I just sorted orders by newest because it seems like the fairest, but if there's something out of line that we have to look at, let's do that.
I saw that there were a couple marked 3.0.
Yeah, just look at
Yeah, actually that's a great idea. I tried it the last time and I not labeled milestones. It's almost like we are organized.
It's almost like we're organized.
All right, preferences on this one.
I like the bottom.
So this one I've set up another meeting to go over that.
You want to do our result?
Let's do this one since you're here.
Not cutting the line at all.
No.
Well, we only spent 50 minutes on this one. Steven just commented on it. Jesus.
Is he online?
He also just commented on the phone.
Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to get it logged.
Yeah. Right. So the reason we need the API is we have one pointer type that we expose for doing interop with OpenSSL. In previous versions, we only ever bound to OpenSSL 1.0, so it was not ambiguous. Now we dynamically bind between 1.0 and 1.1. If you are doing p-invokes and you're on the wrong one, you will crash the process. So you need to know which library we're using.
And what do you mean by different pointer? You mean different sizes?
No, if you have a safe EVP p key handle, like if you have an EVP underscore p key star from OpenSSL 1.0 and you give it to us and we pass it to OpenSSL 1.1,
okay.
we will crash your process.
You cannot round trip wrong handles. Yeah.
Right. So if you created one of these by p-invoke, but you went against 1.0 and we went against 1.1, or the other way, then
makes sense.
Then it's.
Is there any cases where you'd have both OpenSSL versions loaded and going through?
If you did a p-invoke against OpenSSL, you get whichever one you picked, and we get whichever one we picked.
So then, why would it be static then? For simply because kind of wrong.
Well, our runtime when we started, we picked an OpenSSL, and it won't change for the rest of the process.
So you're just finding that's ours, not necessarily theirs.
This is ours.
But they might be using the handle for theirs, right?
I mean, technically, it just wraps an int header. So.
Yeah. So I was wondering whether or not it should be an instance method on the handle. Like, which version of OpenSSL does you come from?
But if they wrapped theirs, wouldn't it fail terribly when they disposed it?
Yes. Yes. So it's which it tells you which version is going to release handle is going to call.
Okay.
So if they created one via p-invoke, release handle will send it to the wrong place.
Okay.
Sorry, release handle will send it to where we're going to send it.
Yeah.
And the version number is basically whatever OpenSSL gives you back.
It's opaque, but it's 0x10100008F currently.
So it's an integer.
It is a C long, but yes.
Why is the version useful for anything other than this release? Why wouldn't we just say use this release or this release for this handle?
In 3.0, and we're going to backport to 2.1 probably, we don't know which version of OpenSSL we're using until runtime, because we dynamically portably bind it. Mm-hmm. It's not.
Yeah, but that still could be a property of which release am I going to call? Is it two different? I'm asking, are you going to only use this for determining which release to call? It sounds like there's two different versions of release for the.
So the use case for this is if you're going to be p-invoking into OpenSSL directly and playing with pointers, you need to call the correct, give me the version you think you are. If it is not exactly equal to the version I return on this, you cannot use this type.
Usually the OpenSSL version is returned by their libraries as a C long.
Yes.
Are there any platforms on which a C long is 64 bits?
All Unixes.
Should this be... oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, it says that. Great. I can read. I have eyes. They just don't work.
Yeah, so their version numbers are currently, like, they are currently 29-bit numbers. They have a scheme. It would take a lot to exceed 29 bits. But technically, their API is capable of reporting 64-bit numbers unless you compile it for 32-bit.
So, but I just don't understand how we use this API. Is it just an equality check? Is that the same as the one we expect and we call it, otherwise we don't? Like, how else do you compare otherwise? Like,
so in .NET, we will never read this. If you are writing third-party code and you are p-invoking into OpenSSL, you will need to know what version of the library you p-invoked into, and if it is not equal to this value, then you need to fail.
I think he was asking, are we providing constants so people know what to compare it to?
It changes every month.
so you're saying
there
that
are no constants.
So you're saying when I load some OpenSSL version, I need to know what version tag that is essentially, right?
You need to call SSL EAY or OpenSSL version depending on which OpenSSL you're using, and if you don't get the same answer as this one, you need to not use this type.
So why?
More than this type, you can't pass this through any of our APIs, right? The handle are
If we gave it to you, it's fine.
Yeah.
You just can't. You can't sensibly talk about this type with your p-invokes.
So since they change the versions every month, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
are some versions compatible with each other? Or literally it has to be a equals match?
If you somehow end up in a state where they are slightly different, that's technically safe. That technically probably won't crash your process, but it means that you have two different instances of the library loaded.
We probably don't want to have been in the
Expected
business of
it
saying
to,
what is compatible with what, right?
Sorry, I would have expected if you're loading two different DLLs, there's a really good chance their free routines are going to be accessing state specific to that DLL. I would expect very likely to get crashes. No.
I mean, the OpenSSL doesn't use private memory management, so they just use malloc and free. So it would technically work,
But so all their release is doing is calling free on it. They're not doing any other cleanup of linked lists or anything that references that handle or any such things.
They don't use opaque handles. They use just pointers. And if you had 1.1.0a and 1.1.0b both loaded, like the difference in them is a bug fix somewhere, their frees are probably compatible. Again, but you had to do very weird things to get those both loaded because they try to be the same library, and you shouldn't be able to have both on your system. But 1.1 and 1.0, you certainly can because they have different SO names.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like a very complicated scheme. Like, why would I ever bother then using this handle type ever if I load my own version and compare them, blah, blah, blah? I would just say use your own version, never use this type, period.
So this type exists for if you want to do cryptography, so asymmetric key cryptography using a hardware security module. We have no API that lets you do that. But if you can get the pointer to the private key, then RSA OpenSSL can accept one of these in a constructor, and then you can use all our types to do the work.
So what code would I write then? I would p-invoke manually to
you would p-invoke engine load whatever your HSM driver is. You would p-invoke opening your handle. That would give you EVP _ p key star. You turn it into one of these and pass it to RSA OpenSSL's constructor.
And I have to use that type, otherwise I cannot call our own APIs in that.
Correct, because we only take the safe handle. We definitely don't take a raw int there, but.
Yeah. So I still understand, like, what scenario would I use this API then in?
Well, as Jeremy just said, you want to create a managed RSA instance, but you want to back it with a handle that's backed by an HSM key, and you're using OpenSSL. So say that you're imagine like a signing service or Azure Key Vault, right? Like Azure Key Vault uses HSMs under the covers. How would you write that without actually being able to use this API? Like how would you get our RSA classes to be able to interface with the hardware directly without going through this, basically? Maybe that's a bad way of phrasing that.
I'm still not entirely sure what the code would look like. I mean, like, basically it sounds like what you're saying is you're p-invoking into OpenSSL yourself.
Yeah.
You are
just to get the handle.
To do whatever you want to do with this one. Then there's another API. There's an API you should always call, which is, I guess, like OpenSSL get version or whatever, right? and then you're always supposed to compare that output to this one to make sure that the p-invoke that you p-invoked into is actually the one that the runtime is using as well.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes.
And there's no way for us to make that thing just bulletproof to say like here's how you use the runtime one all the time. Like isn't it just like if the string is the same we will load that guy? Like how would you end up with a different
So
OpenSSL
if you
version?
write a p-invoke against libcrypto.so.1.0.0,
Right.
and at runtime we see OpenSSL 1.1 is also on your system, we will prefer 1.1. So now we
because
pick
the version
1.1.
number is part of the
Yeah.
of the file. I see.
Yeah.
Shouldn't we
What
just
we're doing
expose a constant then?
is we don't know what it is.
Should we not just expose the file name of the library we loaded then? Instead of-
We don't know what it is.
You don't know which library you're loading?
We call DL open and pass it a bunch of these are some compatible names I understand, and it says, here's your library handle. I don't think you can go from that and ask it, where did this come from?
I see. And given that we cannot make it a constant because it actually varies between builds, and given that it's an attribute, you can't really put in a dynamic string, so you're kind of screwed.
Jeremy, what's the? I mean, I know
Oh,
this.
shit.
I know the use case, but like, where did this come from? Is someone hitting this, and what's their scenario?
Well, we just added the support for 1.0 and 1.1, and this was on the list of things that would be broken. And this is
Right. But
doing
what
it
do
before.
we? What kind of code do we expect people to actually write that's going to hit this? I'm wondering if this is being too proactive.
Azure IoT is opening a private key off of the trusted platform module chip, and then they're using our API to mate that with a private or X509 certificate 2 object so they can use it in SSL stream. So this is
And what do we expect? What do we expect them to do if they
Yeah.
compare and it doesn't match?
Yeah, they're screwed.
abort.
Is that really the right answer?
No, so they'll need to understand how to write the code that can handle both. So this is saying, sorry, we didn't think far enough ahead, and we've created a platform problem, and you have to deal with it.
So wouldn't be the better fix be once we have this native library infrastructure where you can basically do load library get proc address, so we just expose the OpenSSL one that we have, and you can just go effectively get proc address on that one, and then that's the one you use. And that returns you null for the method you were into. You're like, sorry, I can't do whatever I want to do on this version of OpenSSL apparently that the runtime is using.
I don't know that that will tell us what our shim library bound against. You would be doing a different version of
You may
native
not.
library
Well, you
interrupt.
would just basically return the equivalent of the handle, right? So basically, you return the native library instance that the runtime bound, right? As the other API. You know what I mean?
No?
So when you say get proc address, you pass in the module handle, right? On Windows, right? And I guess the Linux one is basically effectively the same, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would expect that we can basically give an API in the OpenSSL library to say, give me the native library that corresponds to the OpenSSL thing that you loaded, and then I can from there on I can say get proc address and blah blah blah, and then find my way to the API. Then I never have to do anything else, and then I will effectively always work.
Well,
Assuming the API is
except
actually
the troubles
existing.
that, like, based on what we kind of target, the users have trouble to. They need to find out which version it is and how to actually interrupt with that. We have shims for working with OpenSSL, as Jeremy
So
explained on Friday.
in portable builds, so if somebody installs the pre-built, then we do everything dynamically, and we would
Right.
have a DL sim library handle. What we want all the distros to do when we get source build working is to not build portably. It will be a direct build. We won't have a library handle
Right.
because the library loader had the library handle and we never had it. So we wouldn't have one to. In our preferred scenario, we would not have a library handle.
So maybe I don't understand, like, what would portable code do that? Portable code would literally have like 10 pinvoke declarations and say, I work with OpenSSL 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and then in my own code I say, if this one is this one, if this one is this one, is this one is that one, then eventually I say, okay, fuck it, I fail. Because I mean, like, otherwise you're bound to one particular version of .NET Core, right? And you never work anywhere else, right?
Yeah, they'll have to do something like that.
Okay.
OpenSSL made breaking changes across the boundary. Like, this is us reacting to that.
And so you're saying there's also not really a chance you can do effectively the equivalent of load library get proc address, unless you know the versions of OpenSSL, because even if the method exists, doesn't tell you like how you're supposed to call that because they may change structures and other things in it.
I mean, they definitely changed all their structs, but they also renamed a bunch of methods, and yeah, effectively they're different libraries. Unfortunately, we treat them as the same.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
I guess
I did a whole talk last week on that.
I guess in that case,
But we can make a new, like,
that's what you have to do
Steve
to make
says
it
it
work.
feels weird to be on this type. We can make a new type, OpenSSL version, but then I don't know what to call the property. So,
Let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
I would. You said it's 29 bits.
yeah. Well, so right now,
Is there a
they're-
negative to using a long?
No, I mean, if we're
You don't care about the size, correct?
yeah, no. Again,
It's not perfect.
somebody would really just do this as at a startup if they're doing pinvoke into OpenSSL and then they're operating.
So it's a
with this.
one-time cost.
Currently, I believe I have exactly one customer, and currently he's on paternity leave.
So it's a C style long, not a C style unsigned long.
It is a C style long.
Okay. So long would be the most direct translation.
Unless they make a breaking change in
Why
the-
not return int pointer?
Because it's not an int pointer.
It's a system.int pointer though.
It is not an int pointer.
It may not be a pointer, but int pointer is a native sized integer.
Yes, but we do not use intpitter for API to represent numbers.
But should we?
No.
Okay.
Then shouldn't we have a type to accurately represent that?
Yeah, but I don't think we would add that type
That's
just to
a
this
different
API.
proposal.
Yeah,
So-
there was a proposal to say this is a C style long going across a P invoke boundary.
Yeah.
But it's not a different type. It's just an
Right.
attribute for P invoke purposes.
And I believe Jan K recommended if you're worried about that, use long, and then add the P invoke declaration that says this is a C long.
Okay.
Currently in our shim we truncate it to 32-bit, but we could certainly change our shim to always upcast it to 64-bit. Not that we support 32-bit Linux.
Yeah.
So
You could also just expose it as a byte array or something of the bytes they gave us back, whatever that is.
Gee.
then I have to clone it and
Now you have Indianness issues.
all sorts of problems.
Actually wouldn't have Indianness issues.
I think we should add some use case, like expected use of this, is where we expect them to be exact matches. Maybe to write some user sample code of how they expect people to use this.
Yeah, based on what you said, I think you would, for correctness, you want exact match because you cannot really reason about what they do.
Yeah.
Okay, so then at least call that out.
That's my fourth point. But yeah, we can add some docs there.
Yeah. All right. Otherwise, let's move on because I think you spent enough time on
Who's the last one?
great API design of OpenSSL.
Yep.
All right. So, anything else, Steven? Do you have preferences on yours?
What about the top one?
I think. Sorry, I can't see your screen because I'm having link trouble. But
Oh, yeah, you're still
are you talking
using-
about the async enumerable stuff? Is that what you're talking about, mine?
Well, I basically just looked at everything that's in the milestone 301, and you have like 4 or 5
Yeah, so
items.
I sent you an email about those.
Yeah, I know. I
uh,
haven't had the time looking at that yet. So
Okay,
is it-
my recommendation was we set aside a dedicated time and invite some of the
Yeah.
C# language team for that.
I think they're too big
So
to
I
read.
would skip mine.
All right.
All right, so
Can we do
the
the
top
third
one.
one? Can we do the third one?
The top one I think we looked at before. So this one we're meeting for tomorrow.
And read-only sequence, I think, is its own.
Stephen, what about the thread pool unsafe queue user work item?
Sure, we could look at that.
Yeah. And then the read-only sequence one, I think we covered that one as well. Okay, I think the cancellation token one. Did we already look at that?
It's 31986, Steve.
No, we have.
31986.
Sorry, 31968.
31968. Got it. Okay. We should talk about this one now. Is that what you're saying?
That's the one on Emo's screen.
Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at right now because it seems easy enough.
So the request is, which I think is fine. Cancellation token has a register method. You hook up a callback, and then it gives you back, a handle that you can use to unregister the callback. This captures execution context, so it flows async locals and stuff like that. And David's request is just like we have key user work item and unsafe key user work item, is to add an unsafe register that doesn't flow the execution context. Flowing the execution context adds a little bit of overhead. So we actually have this code path internally that we use pretty much every place in MS Core Lib that uses cancellation token.register. It uses an internal overload that doesn't capture execution context. He's basically asking for that to be made public.
So how would you use this safely though? Because if you don't capture execution context, like how do you make sure you don't screw up somebody else's callback?
You would use this for your own stuff. So if if all you're doing in the callback is setting some variable or something that doesn't require the context to be flown, then you know that it's safe to not flow execution context, and so you could save a few cycles by not flowing it. Flowing it basically requires on the callee side capturing something from a TLS variable, and then on the caller side capturing, and then on the callee side using execution context.run, which sort of sets up, saves off whatever the current context is, puts in place the captured one, invokes your delegate with that, and then as it's unwinding, it puts back the old one. So it adds a few stack frames. It adds a little bit of overhead, and if you were using this on a high perf path, you would want to avoid whatever you could. So that's the motivation.
So we already use this terminology unsafe.
Yeah.
For these.
Yeah, it's a sort of unfortunate terminology.
Exactly.
It hails from a time when execution context did a whole bunch of stuff. A lot of it had to do with security. So there was like host security, host context and security context, and it would flow CAS and all this kind of stuff. At this point, execution context is basically just async locals in .NET Core. It's basically just async locals. Yeah. And so whether it's safe or unsafe, it doesn't really have anything to do with safety, but we've established this pattern throughout the framework. So pretty much anything that has a capturing and a non-capturing alternative, that it's sort of prefaced with unsafe.
Well, we have configured a wait.
The alternative is we just make it a Boolean.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Configure a wait.
It was snark, not a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Steve, I'm looking through call sites, both in full framework and in core, and I don't see anyone who ever says use synchronization context true, use execution context false.
No, it's not execute. The overload here is use synchronization context, not use execution context.
Yeah, but the internal method takes both as parameters, both use synchronization context and use execution context, and I don't see any callers that ever pass true false for those parameters.
I don't believe that's true. Hold on one second.
Okay.
I mean, it seems like an orthogonal choice, right? Are you suggesting it to not have it? Like always.
I'm trying to figure out what the scenario is where you would want the sync context but not the execution context.
What does
Where
the
you would
sync
want the
context just mean? You continue on the same thread?
Yeah,
sorry. What did you say, Levi?
Where would you want the synchronization context but not want the execution context? It seems like you might break the sync context.
So you kind of never want the synchronization context. That was the terrible feature we added.
Should this not have that?
So the method you want to look for, Levi, is called internal register without EC.
Yes.
Well, then I guess the question, Steve, is if you never want the synchronization context, why is it a parameter?
Because it was a stupid feature to add in the first place.
Yeah, but if this is a new API, can we just leave off bool use synchronization context? Just say if you call unsafe, you get no across the board.
I mean, they're two different things. So there's a question of whether it's a useful feature or not. There's a question of whether we want to remain consistent with past. But there are certainly places where you wouldn't want to flow execution context, but you would want to use the synchronization context.
Okay.
So, like if you were, execution context is like, whether you want your async locals to flow.
Yeah.
Synchronization context is whether you want to post it back to a different thread, basically.
I see.
Is it enough of a decision point that you need to make that it should be a mandatory parameter, or should it be optional with the default to false?
The synchronization context?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd almost be okay if we just left it off entirely, and because I don't know of anyone who passes true here. And it's just a question of whether we want to expose the functionality that's there, or just cut our losses and say, well, you don't get this because, who cares? From that perspective, we could, if we wanted to be consistent, we could make it, a default optional parameter with false.
Saves us from needing to add it back later.
Yeah, I know what I was about to say. I mean, I like the optional but false because it kind of makes a statement that you probably don't want it to be true.
Yeah.
It's consistent if you ever have to do it, and seems reasonable. My other question is do we have preferences for action object versus action? Do we actually care? Because we're not very consistent when we use these delegates.
Presumably
Action object seems
matches register.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry,
there's also register that just takes
what was the
action.
alternative you were suggesting?
Just action.
But the state is passed, I assume.
So force a closure if you need to capture state. Is that the idea?
Oh, sorry. Action. Oh, I guess action doesn't take any arguments, right? Never mind. Right in front of mine. Yeah. I was thinking action takes already object, but no, it does not.
Why is it not generics? So why is it not action of T?
Because internally it needs to be stored. Internally, the field that backs it has to have an actual type. And that means that everything needs to get coerced to a single type anyway, which would force us to make a closure regardless. So we may as well just make the user do it.
Well, it could be unsafe register of T, and then we basically convert it from T to object to store it, and then back to T. So
And
when the callback is called, you get the T back.
And have where T is class.
Yeah.
I mean,
Where are you saving the T?
But I
we
don't
could
think
make
it's
it work.
worth it.
We could make it work. It would just add cost. So, for example, right now, all of this is we allocate or we get a callback node basically, and we could derive a callback node of T from it, make the invocation virtual, store the delegate, and kind of marshal around that way. But that would add a non-trivial amount of cost, in particular because one of the ways we save costs now in .NET Core is we pool these allocated nodes. So if you just register, unregister, register, unregister, you basically keep reusing the same node. If we had to do that per T, that would get complicated in a jiffy.
I think we don't
Plus,
do
it
it
would add
anywhere.
virtual calls.
Like the current cancellation token registration takes action of object. This is consistent with that. It's just avoiding the It looks like the current API. So
Yep.
ship it.
All right. Let me just approve that now. All right. So this is done. All right, Stephen. We now look at 32485,
32485.
which is the unsafe queue user.
So this is basically another expose something internal to be public. Right now, the thread pool is capable of, it's not just capable of executing its own work items, it basically has an interface called iThreadPool work item. And so anything that implements that interface, you can just shove that thing into the queue. And when threadpool goes to execute it, it just calls its execute method. The internal one has one other member on the interface, but it's legacy. And so, to make this work, we would probably, we would make it work internally, and the public one would just have execute. The idea here is basically expose that capability so that you could, for example, have an object that implements the interface and just continually requeue that one object if it was representing something that didn't need to change every time you invoked it. So, like in the ASP.NET case, they have sort of a scheduler that wraps the thread pool, and anytime they want to queue something, they could basically just queue the scheduler itself back to the thread pool. The thread pool will call execute and would pick up stuff from their scheduler. We use this internally. Task is an iThreadpool work item. Timer is an iThreadpool work item. Timer is actually an example where, or it's the timer, QTimer, an internal variant of it. It's an example where we just keep repeatedly requeue the same item. Like if you create a periodic timer, we're under the covers, we're just requeuing the same item over and over and over. So there's no allocation for that.
So would we be?
What's unsafe about this?
It's not, the runtime isn't flowing any execution context on your behalf. It's all within the iThreadful work item. So like when you call queues or work item, we allocate an object that captures the execution context, and it's that object that then is responsible for using execution context.run when it gets executed. So if you're passing your own iThreadful work item here, it's that iThreadful work item's responsibility to whatever it wants to do about execution context. The Threadful is not going to do anything on its behalf, which is why it's unsafe.
I see.
Steve, in the comment here, there's something about a display name for the work item. Is the idea that you would just call toString on the work item to get that, or do you need another method for that?
No, so that's about debugging, and David wanted to have the ability to basically, like in a dump, be able to see what a work item was. And so if you were creating your own iThreadful work item, you can put whatever additional data you want on that and see it in the dump.
It would just show up in SOS, yeah.
So would we be publicly exposing the iThreadful work itemness of task and timer, etc.? Or would they stay with a private interface?
We would probably be exposing that nature. Not on timer, but on, because timer is actually a wrapper for the object that implements this. Okay. But task, yeah, we would probably see that in the public surface area.
Does that?
I think what would end up happening is there's this. I mentioned there's currently an internal interface. I think basically task would implement that internal interface, which would inherit this public one.
That makes it public.
As someone who designed task, are you comfortable with people passing raw tasks into this API?
That's a really good question.
Or are you comfortable with them calling execute on a task?
That would be terrible.
Yeah.
So adding this might require some mild rejiggering of how task works.
I'm thinking.
All right, well, get back to us on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm going to need to think about that because I don't want to have to make the thread pool type check and have a separate internal interface from a external interface. I don't want to have a separate object that task needs to queue, and I don't want someone to be able to walk up and say threadpool.unsafe queues work item task.
Well, what if you just had the internal interface wrap the public interface and forward the execute? Like you made a class that wrapped when somebody calls this.
That would largely defeat the allocation purpose.
That's a good point.
So is the execute really the only method needed to implement our own task?
Yeah, I mean, there's one other method today that has to do with thread aborts, which in core is a no-op.
All right. Well, apparently this needs Steve to think about it on how much does it destroy the universe.
That makes me so happy that thread abort
So,
fails.
one API design question: does it need to be an interface, or we would consider an abstract class?
If it's an abstract class, task becomes weird.
Well, if it becomes an abstract class, then task has to get wrapped in one of those in order to be used.
But maybe we don't even want task.
I think a common case for this, Christoph, it's a good question, but I think a common case for this would be adding this to some object you already have so that you could reuse it in this way, and that would basically steal away the inheritance chain because it's single inheritance. So I don't think we'd want to make this a class.
And we don't worry. We basically worry about this scenario more than about having to add more members to it. Correct?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, we've had this interface for I think 9 years, and we have never had to add to it.
Because as an abstract class, if you had your own existing scheduler with a complicated inheritance hierarchy, you just need to make a sibling object for it that wraps it through this interface. So you're talking one extra object that you're holding on to, which wouldn't really be terrible. So
yeah.
But it's still a trade-off. So that's why, like, if, you know, Steve's answer was, we've had it for 9 years and we didn't have a need. I think it's good
And it
enough.
only has one member, which I
That's
buy.
Yeah.
Like the shape seems stable, right? It's not like a grab bag of stuff where it's a gamble. It's like, well, you queue something, you need to execute it, and that's the only thing in models, which seems.
But could I, for example, use
Reasonable.
struct as a task? Like on my own task now? Because if I have a struct which implements that pull work item, is it gonna work?
It'll get boxed.
I mean,
when you pass it
yeah.
in there.
Yeah, it'll get boxed when you queue it, but it would.
I mean,
I don't know if there's some internals who assume that.
There's more to task than just being able to execute in a thread pool. So you cannot have well, we have struct tasks, but
Yeah, I mean, it would. The main benefit of task over thread pool queues or work item is that you basically have a handle that you can then await, and a struct would be really bad for that because you'd be making a copy, and so your copy would never complete because the one that completed was the one that was the boxed one queued to the thread pool.
well, unless
Yes,
unless the struct points to some object that actually contains the state.
So in that case, though, you probably just want to pass that object. Because otherwise, you're allocating again to box the struct, but maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. I mean, you could make it work on. You could make a struct work. It's certainly not the primary use case.
Yeah, yeah.
Though the Jeremy's question about task bothers me, so I need to go think about that.
Yeah. So let's just record this and then move on, I think. Because it's.
So the shape's okay, but it may have unintended consequences as
Yeah.
proposed.
Seems reasonable.
And what namespace? Sorry.
Would be by thread pool is by system threading, I
So it
suppose.
would be next to thread pool.
Yeah.
Hmm. Is that what we want? It's kind of a root threading namespace, and the interface is probably for some super advanced scenarios.
So you want it as a nested type off of thread pool?
Yeah?
Why not? That would work.
And then you can call it work item.
Seems fine. On the task front, I mean, we could just say if you queue something whose implementation of this interface you don't own, like you're just asking for trouble. And hey, look, unsafe's in the name, so.
Which honestly, like that's the thing that I thought about. Is like I think that's fine. I mean, it's a proper optimization. The API, kind of tells you don't do that, and then you have to think about whether you want to do that or not. I think that's reasonable.
So we're ignoring the unsafe method, like making this a public interface and then having task and others implement it. Task would now get an execute method. Granted, it would probably be an explicit interface implementation,
Yeah.
but is that, like, do we want people calling that? It's a public API that doesn't have unsafe in the name.
Yeah, that's also a good point.
But given that we don't want people to use it on task, why would we implement this interface on task?
What can you
Task
do
already
today?
implements this thing.
Do
No,
it
it
today.
implements the internal one.
Yeah.
We would keep the internal one and keep it internal and just don't implement this one. This one is
Yeah, but that was
really-
my question. That was my comment. Now we have to be able to support either in the thread pool. So now the thread pool has to store it as an object, and every time it executes a work item, it has to type check for the interface.
Or one of the two approaches needs an object to forward the dispatch from one interface to the other.
Or we have just an internal wrapper that unifies these two.
Right, but that's
But then-
that's what Jeremy just said, and that's an extra allocation.
So essentially every task gets another vtable bigger.
We might be able to, like you said, reconfigure it internally.
Yeah, so that would be the, if we can work those things out, then Steve might be happy with it. So you would prefer it as a nested interface, Christopher?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't help that much. I wish maybe we had some namespace for like wacky corner case scenario APIs, not a root.
System.runtime.bar
System.threading.wacky corner case.
I think nested type seems reasonable though.
Yeah, I
I
think
it's-
nested type is the best next choice, given that we don't have this namespace. Like in some of the second level namespaces, we have what pretty much amounts to .advanced. For threading, I don't think we have anything like it. What are all the sub namespaces of system threading?
Tasks, concurrent. No, that's collections.
I would like some concurrent threading, please.
It's basically just system threading and system threading tasks.
Yeah.
And what does happen if
There are a couple others. There's access control.
so if
That's
we-
like for ACLs related to threading, but
Yeah, we don't have anything. Nested interface is fine.
and what happens if the task implements this public interface and I cast it to the interface and call execute manually before I pass it, or at the same time like that?
That's what Steve's thinking
Yeah.
about. It looks like system threading, and then it has channels and tasks are its children.
Unsafe things happen. Or we call them unsafe.
So it should
They are
so it
actually
should be
unsafe. Your program may be wrong. Yeah, that's why additional advantage of,
We just
of an
rename main to
interface
unsafe main, and then
versus class is that we can implement the interface explicitly. And then it's kind of not visible, not in your face. If it was class, we cannot implement it explicitly.
so there was one other question around. So for legacy reasons, all of the key user work item methods return bool, and they all return true. Vance suggested that for consistency, maybe we should just do the same thing.
do you know why they return a Boolean?
I think the original thinking was they would return false if for some reason it failed to queue. But to my recollection, it has always been the case that it could never return anything but true. I'd throw an out-of-memory exception or something, but
I mean, consistency seems good, I guess. If we ever come up with a reason why thread pool queue user work item could start returning false, then it would presumably apply to this as well.
Yeah, but now every single
all over,
application would
yeah.
break because no one assumes it will ever return false.
So
Well, but you
That's-
pass in different data, right?
that's what .NET Core 4.0 is for. We started returning false from someplace.
That I imagine would be a disallowed change.
To be fair, we're at 3.0 right now. We're not quite there yet.
So
I
according
think
to
4x is when .NET Core becomes in-place updates
Yeah.
only.
so according to
I
MSDN,
love the docs for this are great. Returns true if the method is successfully queued. Not supported exception is thrown if the work item could not be queued.
So is either true or throw? No, that's
Yeah.
just great.
Yep.
It's a non-nullable bool.
It's a non-nullable bool.
it's a non-falsible bool. It's really
A non-falsible bool.
Non-false of the
I
constraint. to
love
bool.
it.
But what it's saying is, caller, you can't keep a value in RAX because I'm going to overwrite it.
Yes.
All right, so here's the question. Does this capture everything we said? So are we okay with people being able to queue instances of existing types that implement iThread pool queues of items such as task? Are we okay with people being able to call invoke? I think one of them is enough. Call or invoke. To invoke, execute from task. Can we hide the, or I should say on, I guess. But yeah. And the last one is, can we hide the same? Anything else?
You probably want the word
Sorry,
out
can we
if you're
hide what?
thinking
I
that.
can't see what you're writing.
Can we hide the interface a bit by, e.g., making it a nested type of thread pool?
So thread pool dot iWork item.
Add a space where your cursor is.
Add a space where my
Yeah.
cursor is? You mean,
Because
So
there's
definitely,
in the proof of
definitely
work.
don't mark this approved. We need to think a little more about it.
yeah, no, I think that's what I will do. I will just say comment, and then I signed you up to think about, and then I will mark the API as API needs work.
So signed up.
We need like a thinking man emoji label.
Oh, there is one.
Yeah, I got mission control to change to it while
Oh, good.
between the time it thinks a task finished and it has collected the results. It gets a thinking bubble.
There we go. There's your thinking one. You think about that, I guess, but who
That-
cares?
That kind of looks like he's thinking about the brand buffet.
All right. Oh, this is the one we just looked at, right? So it's the one we will finish on Friday, I believe.
Everything else just got deferred.
What happened to the top one?
Did it
That's
get
just-
marked?
No, it was like recently.
I think we
There
recently.
was some
What did
discussion
happen?
around that.
I just didn't remember seeing it on the list when we were looking at it. Oh, it got added to the 3.0 milestone while we were in this meeting.
So who assigned the milestone?
Santi.
Okay, so
Yeah, that's the final proposal. The one at the end.
Oh, we have
Or
one
that
here,
one,
or-
that update. Yeah.
oh, that's right, you're here.
Yeah.
Forgot about that. All right, so this is the final one, or is that the one at the bottom?
That's the final one.
So
They are
the-
the same. I put it on top, so it was easier.
Okay, so this is literally the final one here.
Yeah. No.
Okay, add range, insert range, remove range.
What type of this exist now?
This is observable collection.
collection.
So we are adding
Oh,
support for ranges.
Do we have an actual
Should
range
we?
type?
Not yet.
Not yet, but it seems like we will have very, very soon. These APIs would kind of make sense. Also, we could use them as to validate the design.
No, because you generally don't. Yeah, I guess for remove range you would.
Remove range, replace range.
Insert one.
Insert range, that one is.
Do you want to tie these two designs though? I mean, given that, I don't know, 90% of the BC already takes index and count, it's just yet another API where we would eventually might add an overload to that. But
We are adding ranges.
yeah, but like, I don't know.
We do that in lots of other places in firmware too.
Yeah, that's the thing. So I would not tie the two together to just keep our own sanity.
I mean, if we had range and we'd added it, in many versions ago, would we still add both overloads, or would we say just use the new one? Like, until we realized that we broke VB.
Yes, that's right.
We were saying just use spam. Don't add array things. And then-
No, I mean range you can use from VB, right? Because it's
Right.
literally just a super cheap struct wrapper. Right?
Well, it's not designed yet, so we don't know what it's going to be.
Well, I mean, we know there will be a struct that takes 2 ins, right? I mean, I think that one is
I'm sure
pretty
by
much
the end it'll
given.
be rough like.
Yeah, it
So-
will be reflex struct.
Does add range already exist on a type somewhere? Is that what this is saying?
Add range. So this is a pattern that we have toward the BCL today.
Add range doesn't exist in this type.
Yeah, but we do have it in other places. Like
and
list
I,
of
and I was
tiers,
wondering,
for
like, does it have to be typed as IEnumerable? Like,
example.
can it be typed as a collection type that actually has like a count property?
No, I believe there was a guidance that says don't do that.
Yeah.
Do a dynamic.
But
cast.
our APIs try to downcast to iCollection,
Yeah,
and if it succeeds, then they get the
yeah, which is great. But if this isn't an I collection, like the runtime of this is O of lol.
Well, that's what you get for writing your yield return.
But in this case it still makes sense because I get a single notification, not
Yeah.
500 notifications. So it still does batching.
Yeah.
Like, it may end up having to grow internally 6 or 7 times, but
Yeah.
but just because it But
But the real cost for observable collections is that the UI update happens once, not
Yeah.
n times.
Also,
So
I've
that's-
seen implementations that have like accumulator. They basically first walk the collection, store the items.
You can't do that though,
Mm.
because the collection might change.
No,
So
he's
what?
saying walk it once,
Yeah.
walk it once
persist it.
The link.
Persistent.
as a
And
link.
then-
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
persistent. Yeah, yeah, yeah. yeah.
But that-
Like you
but
could
yeah.
always 2-array it or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you could say, is this I collection? No.
Probably
to
for
array it.
replace
Yeah,
range
but now-
there,
now
we
the-
would need to add another.
Now in
Protected
documentation, you have to
method.
say the runtime of this
Protected
method
virtual
is
method.
this if you pass this and this if you pass this and this. If you pass.
It's,
It's
again,
weird.
add range IEnumerable is a
Yeah, okay,
collection
okay,
common
okay.
pattern that we have.
Sure.
So actually, I'm interested. Why so much controversy in this whole issue, given that this is just adding APIs that we have all over the place?
I was just looking for that. Like, so the question that I had is, should some of them be virtual, and what happens when you want to customize the events? And it seems your proposal is we have 2 virtuals, insert items range,
And we might need another one.
and so those are the ones that do the eventing.
Yes. That's the current pattern that observable collection has. So collection exposes the public types like add branch, like add, insert, remove, and then we have protected virtual methods that collection implementation just calls those types, and then whoever implements those whatever with that. And in an observable collection, that is where we do the event.
So can you summarize the controversy? Like, why is this issue so long? Like, what were people arguing about?
If we should expose these methods in collection, if they should be virtual. They wanted to add also like an add range, replace range with a predicate. So we were discussing why we shouldn't add that, because we could need custom events for that. Because the current events just support like, oh, we deleted this item from this index.
Yeah, we can only model, like the event only supports contiguous. You can't have an arbitrary, set of items that you notify for.
And then just the purpose of this as the aggregate methods is you get 1 remove and 1 replace.
Yeah.
Is the implicit contract that it will not fire that event if the enumerable is empty? Or should it fire it because you call it?
From the implementation that they were proposing, it couldn't fire it.
It couldn't, or
It
would?
couldn't. Because you just fire the event if you need to update the UI, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just...
Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
also, I assume the event has some, like, today doesn't have a way to communicate. I fired, but I actually did not remove anything or did change.
Yeah.
No, actually it does, because
Really?
the event, what is this thing called? It's
looks like it's just an enum saying what
I
what
notified
kind of thing has
property
happened.
it's
event.
just notify
And now it's
collection
up to you to figure out
change.
what happened.
Yeah.
But if the
Gives
enum
you
doesn't have a value,
nothing.
nothing actually happened. Go back to sleep.
Yeah.
So
Again,
this is the API share, but of the event. So the event basically has an action, which is the enum, which is basically telling you what happened, and then
What's
it has
that?
the.
What are the values of the enum?
It's like added, removed, reset is one of them. Reset basically says too many changes,
Yeah.
just read everything, and then added and removed is basically and replace. I think are the 3 items, and so you have the old.
Yeah.
So you have the new starting index with the new items, you have the old items and the old starting index. So you would just say, yeah, I added, but then both collections are empty. So
Yeah.
so you could model it if you really wanted to. But
That's
I would
why
agree
we
with
were-
Santi that the whole point of this is to minimize UI notifications. So why would you do that?
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just... The empty enumerable is a degenerate case that many API doesn't...
And that's why we didn't accept the predicate. Well, I didn't accept the predicate
Yeah, because you can't
APIs
model it.
because we could need custom events for that because we don't know the starting index or the old index for the items. Cause
Gotcha.
So any concerns with the API ship? Otherwise, given that it's only open for 2 years, maybe we should close it now.
Good to go.
probably the only thing that I could call out that I missed there is probably the replace. Like we should add another protected virtual item for replace range because that could cause 2 events in the current state.
Oh.
Because remove items range would cause one event, and then insert item range.
So why would we not have replace items range?
Yeah.
Because it seems like, I mean, I think the eventing supports it, but it has a replace, right, where you have both
Yep.
old and new. It
Mhm.
seems desirable.
Yeah.
I guess,
Why did you not add it here?
I just missed it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I guess what's the reason for having the publics that then just delegate off to a protected virtual of the same name? Are you expecting overloads later?
Yes.
Well, I think
We
would
actually
them.
have two collections in the BCL that override those virtuals.
So the only thing I just noticed, we have a convention for these protected virtual members, and we just basically suffix core. So like it should be called insert range core, not insert items range.
Okay.
Unless you're matching an existing.
Yeah,
pattern.
I was matching the existing pattern for collection. Like the existing virtual methods don't have core. Like the protected virtual methods don't have
Yeah, let's look at this API really quick.
On this type?
collection.
on this type, yeah, in the collection.
Well, it's collection of T, right? That has
What do
most of them?
they?
Yeah.
Are they just random virtual protected,
Oh,
or
for fuck's sake. So
they are
simple
also
instance.
for some operations that
Yeah, like
just implement
add,
the implementation
for example.
for add?
Add.
I see.
Add item.
What is it called? Oh, it's called add item.
Yeah, add item.
Yeah.
So the public API is add, and then the protected virtual is add item.
I see.
Here it is.
Yeah.
So basically,
Yeah, then it should probably keep being consistent within this type.
so it's called insert item, right? There's no add item because it's
Oh
just
yeah, insert item.
with,
Sorry, yeah.
with
That's
an
why I
index of
went
0.
with insert items.
Oh,
range.
index of length, right? Length minus 1. Whatever. So I would say it looks good except for the replace. And
Yeah.
I would make it clear that these are added to observable collection as opposed to a collection of T2 by putting the class name around it.
yeah, that would be helpful too.
Yep.
For fuck's sake.
Unless
Only
your intention is
consider-
that this is on collection and therefore implicitly on observable collection.
What was the name? Insert items range?
What was that?
Are you proposing adding the non-virtual types to collection or observable collection?
Collection.
Oh,
you see,
collection.
that's a whole different question.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not clear that that's what the
So all those APIs go into collection,
collection of T
and then yeah,
and not observable collection.
yeah,
And then observable collection. will
and then
override the
observable
virtuals
collection should implement the protected virtual, override the protected virtual methods to do the eventing correctly.
So are you sure that on collection until we don't use the core name?
and- That's where the
convention?
add item.
That's where the add item
Yeah.
came from.
Okay.
Or sorry, insert item. Collection of T.insert delegates to protected virtual insert item.
I know. It's confusing.
It's even more confusing that I designed the API.
The word core does not appear at all in the source file. For the NetFX version.
The virtual method, why is item plural?
Is it is?
Because both items and range. Should it be like item range? Maybe I'm reading it wrong there. Yes.
I just add the plural because it was multiple items.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fine.
but whichever is fine.
Okay. Almost there. Lunch, Christoph, by the way, before you run away again?
Sure.
Yeah, so the protected virtuals are insert item, remove item, and set item, and clear items.
Yep.
Christoph. Or maybe this one was Kim.
No, I'll blame Anders. Basically I designed it with Anders.
We are live, you realize that. He will find where you live. Alright, so...
Sorry, Kim.
So this is it. We ready with this? Oh, not question mark. This was not a question, this was a statement. Right? Only 2 years.
Alright.
API design is hard, although not that hard either.
It's easy if you do everything in one day. If you do it over 15 years, it's getting hard.
Perfect.
That's why JavaScript is so great. It was designed in 3 days.
All right, guys, I have to sign
You
off
can
now.
kind of tell, right?
Thanks, Emo.
Wow, that one happens.
Are we having problems with